Imagine your paycheck lands on a Friday morning. For about 12 seconds, the number looks bigger than your life feels. The bank app says there is room. Your brain says, finally, I can breathe. Then the old month walks in. Rent is waiting. The card autopay is waiting. Groceries are waiting. Gas is waiting. The subscription you forgot about is waiting. A birthday dinner is waiting. Something in the house is making a noise that sounds expensive. Here is the payoff up front. By the end of this, payday should feel less like a scramble and more like a short decision filter. Before the balance becomes a feeling, the filter asks 3 questions. What already has a claim on this deposit? What is actually flexible? And what should wait until the calmer version of you can decide? No magic savings number, no promise that every bill gets lighter, no individualized financial advice. Just a quieter way to stop one deposit from being asked to answer 20 questions at once. Most money advice arrives at this exact moment and says, be disciplined. I think that is the wrong operating system. A better money rule does something before the noise starts. It says, when money arrives, this part has a job, this part has a deadline, this part is safe to spend, and this part does not get renegotiated at 9:30 at night. That is the relief in this video. Not a fantasy where every bill disappears. Not a lecture where you become a different person by Monday. Just a quieter system where fewer money decisions happen when you are tired. Here is the clean version. Motivation asks you to win the same argument every week. A rule tries to end the argument before it starts, and the best rules are rarely dramatic. They are almost boring. If the paycheck lands, the next 7 days get mapped first. If a recurring charge appears, it has to earn its place. If a bad week happens, the restart is already written down. By the end, I want one question to feel obvious. What part of your money life would get easier if the decision were already made? The strange thing about motivation is that it often shows up when you least need it. On Sunday afternoon, with coffee on the desk and a clean page open, almost anyone can imagine a better month. You can see the plan. You can see the person you want to be. You can say, this month I will cook more, spend less, check the statement, cancel the app, put money aside, and stop pretending the card balance is a future problem. Then Tuesday arrives. Work runs late. Someone needs something. The grocery bill is higher than you expected. You are hungry in a parking lot. The app remembers your card. The screen asks for one tap, and the future version of you suddenly loses the vote. That is why I do not trust motivation as a money strategy. Motivation depends on a mood. Money does not wait for that mood. A bill does not care whether you feel inspired. A due date does not care whether you slept. A checkout flow does not care whether you had a hard day. The financial world is built out of defaults, deadlines, and small paths of least resistance. If your system is built out of good intentions, it is underbuilt. Discipline still matters, but discipline is expensive attention. You only get so much of it in a week. I used to think a good budget was mostly a better spreadsheet. More categories, cleaner numbers, prettier tabs. Then you notice that a prettier budget can still fail if it asks you to be emotionally fresh at every decision point. The better question is not, how do I become the kind of person who always chooses correctly? The better question is, where can I make the correct choice the default path? That is the first big shift. A rule is not a slogan. It is a pre-decision. It moves the choice out of the hot moment and into the cool one. Away from the parking lot, back to payday. Away from the checkout screen, back to the calendar. Away from the exhausted evening, back to the morning when you can still think straight. Money rules work better than motivation when they respect the actual week people live in. Friction, tiredness, timing mismatches, social pressure, and normal desire. The goal is not to remove desire. The goal is to stop making every desire a full negotiation with your future. There is a research name for part of this, implementation intentions. The plain English version is simple. If this situation appears, then this response happens. Not, I should spend less. That is a wish. If my paycheck lands, Then I move the bill money before I look at the free balance. That is a rule. Not, I should stop impulse buying. If I want a non-essential item over a set personal threshold, then it waits on the list until tomorrow. That is a rule. Not, I should get back on track. If a week goes sideways, then the next payday starts with a restart checklist, not with shame. That is a rule. Research on implementation intentions frames this as linking an anticipated situation to a goal-directed response, when, where, and how the response happens. A later meta-analysis reviewed 94 independent tests and reported a medium to large positive effect on goal attainment, with D equals 0.65. That does not mean a money rule magically saves a fixed number of dollars. It does not mean every viewer gets the same outcome. It means the mechanism is serious enough to respect, pre-deciding the situation, and the response can change follow-through. Money is full of repeat situations. Payday, rent week, grocery night, a raise, a refund, a sale, a bad mood, a renewal email, a friend suggesting dinner, a balance transfer offer, a phone upgrade cycle, a late fee warning. If those situations keep appearing and you answer them from scratch every time, the week gets heavier than it has to be. The if-then rule lowers the number of times you have to become wise on command. That is the bright relief. A rule does not make you perfect. It lets the calm version of you show up later, when the stressed version of you is holding the phone. So the first kind of money rule is a routing rule. If money arrives, money gets routed before mood gets a vote. The route can be simple: fixed claims, near-term bills, planned spending, buffer, longer-term goals. The exact categories depend on the household. The core idea does not. Payday is not free money. Payday is a sorting event. That sentence sounds strict until you feel what it removes. It removes the fake high of seeing the full deposit as available. It removes the ugly surprise of remembering 3 days later that the balance of jobs hidden inside it. It removes some of the private shame from buying groceries and then realizing the electric bill was still waiting. A routing rule is not punishment, it is honesty with better timing. The second kind of rule is a default rule. A default rule says, if I am likely to stay on the path in front of me, I should choose the path before I am tired. This is not only a personal finance idea. It shows up clearly in retirement research. A well-known retirement study looked at automatic enrollment in a workplace retirement plan. The important finding for this video is not a specific recommendation about anyone's retirement account. It is the behavioral pattern. Automatic enrollment significantly increased participation, and many people kept the default contribution rate and fund allocation. Inertia is powerful. The mistake is pretending inertia only hurts you. Inertia is neutral. It serves whoever designs the path. If the default is that the paycheck lands in one account and every company, app, bill, desire, and old habit competes for it, inertia serves chaos. If the default is that certain transfers happen while the money is present, inertia starts serving the plan. Tollbooks beat debates because a debate requires attention. A default requires setup, but automation is not automatically good. A subscription renewal is automation. A trial converting into a paid plan is automation. A card saved in 3 shopping apps is automation. A minimum payment that keeps expensive debt alive is automation. Modern money is already automated. The question is whether the automation points toward relief or leakage. A good default rule has 2 sides. First, make the boring good decision easier to repeat. A bill account, a calendar reminder before rent week, a transfer timed near payday, a weekly review before the busiest day, a grocery list with the same cheap fallback meals, because real life does not need a new culinary identity every Monday. Second, make the tempting bad decision slightly less automatic. Remove the saved card from the app that turns boredom into spending. Turn off one-click checkout where it causes regret. Put renewal dates on a calendar. Keep a waiting list for upgrades that mostly buy the feeling of being ahead. The point is not to live in a locked room. The point is to build a tiny pause where the financial world wants a slide. If inertia is going to exist anyway, let it carry your values more often than it carries someone else's business model. The reason this matters in 2026 is not that everyone is in the same financial position. They are not. The latest Federal Reserve Household Wellbeing Report says that near the end of 2024, a little under 3/4 of adults were doing okay financially or living comfortably. That part matters because the story is not pure doom. But the same report says 29% were worse off financially than 12 months earlier. In the income and expenses section, 60% said price increases had made their financial situation at least somewhat worse, including 17% who said much worse. 17% did not pay all bills in full in the prior month. Among renters, the share was 25%. The March 2026 inflation release from the Bureau of Labor Statistics adds more pressure context. The Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers rose 3.3% over the 12 months ending March. Food rose 2.7%. Food away from home rose 3.8%. Shelter rose 3.0%. Energy rose 12.5%, and gasoline rose 18.9%. Those numbers do not tell your personal story. They do explain why normal categories can feel less flexible than they look on paper. Then there is timing. The Fed report says 29% of adults had income that varied, at least occasionally, from month to month. A household can look okay over 30 days and still feel squeezed inside one bad week if income and bills arrive in the wrong order. The New York Fed's latest household debt report, available during this research phase, covered the fourth quarter of 2025. Total household debt was $18.8 trillion. Credit card balances were $1.28 trillion. Auto loan balances were $1.67 trillion. The overall delinquency rate was 4.8%. Again, the point is not panic. The point is claims. Debt becomes a future claim. Housing becomes a recurring claim. Food and gas become flexible-looking claims that may not be very flexible. Income variability creates timing claims. A subscription is a small claim that hopes you stop noticing it. When claims multiply, motivation gets outnumbered. Rules are not a cure for high prices, low income, medical costs, rent pressure, or structural affordability. A New York Fed report released in May 2026 said 55 million U.S. households have trouble affording necessities, and families below the federal poverty level, plus LS households, together make up 42% of U.S. households. A rule cannot politely route money that simply is not there. That honesty matters. The useful promise is not. Rules solve every money problem. The useful promise is rules reveal the kind of problem you actually have. If the rule makes the month calmer, it was a decision problem. If the rule shows there is not enough money after essentials, that is not a character flaw. That is math. And math needs a different response than motivation. A good rule reduces shame because it separates messy timing from not having enough. It says, here is what better timing can fix, and here is what no amount of guilt can fix. Now we can build the actual operating system, not 50 rules, not a guru rule book. 4 types: routing rules, friction rules, permission rules, restart rules. A routing rule decides where money goes before the month starts making emotional arguments. The simplest routing rule is when income arrives, visible claims get named first. Not because every household should use the same categories, but because invisible claims create fake freedom. A person sees the full deposit and thinks, we have room. 3 days later, the bills prove that room was borrowed from the future. A routing rule makes the future visible earlier. The visual version is a paycheck with labels attached before spending begins. Housing, utilities, minimum obligations, transportation, groceries, medicine, childcare, if it keeps work possible, upcoming due dates, and then the money that is actually flexible. A friction rule makes the decision you tend to regret a little slower. This is not about making life miserable. Friction should be targeted. You do not need friction around every cup of coffee if coffee is not the problem. You need friction where speed is hurting you. Maybe that means removing a saved card from one app. Maybe it means a 24-hour list for upgrades. Maybe it means subscriptions can only be added during a monthly review. Maybe it means no new recurring charge unless another recurring charge leaves. These are examples, not personal prescriptions. The mechanism is the point. Speed is wonderful when it serves a good decision. Speed is expensive when it helps a tired moment become a monthly bill. A permission rule sounds strange, but it may be the most humane rule in the whole system. A permission rule says, this spending is allowed because it was chosen while calm. Without permission rules, people often do two bad things at once. They spend impulsively and feel guilty about spending that actually matters. They put a dinner with friends on trial while ignoring the subscription stack. They buy random convenience and then feel ashamed of the hobby that gives the weak texture. A permission rule protects the spending that buys attention, time, health, relationships, or leverage. It lets money be used without turning every purchase into a courtroom. That is bright relief. Not spend nothing. Spend with fewer private trials. And then there are restart rules. A restart rule is what happens after the plan breaks. Most financial systems are designed for the fantasy month. The fantasy month has no car noise, no illness, no emotional Tuesday, no birthday gift, no late work night, no mistake. Then real life happens, the plan breaks, and the person decides the system failed. But a system that cannot restart was never a system. It was a performance. A restart rule might say, if I miss the weekly review, then I do a 10-minute claims, check on the next payday. If an unexpected bill hits, then I pause new optional recurring payments for 1 month. If I overspend in one category, then I adjust the next 7 days without rewriting my entire identity. The exact restart depends on the household. The core idea is broad enough. Failure should have a next step smaller than shame. Money starts feeling easier there. Not when every number is perfect, when the bad week has instructions. There is a dangerous version of this video that would be easier to write. It would say, rich people have rules, poor people have excuses. It would sound punchy. It would probably get clipped into a motivational short. It would also be wrong in the way bad money advice is often wrong. It would confuse constraints with character. A rule has to fit the constraint. If the real issue is that rent consumes too much of the paycheck, a grocery rule may help a little, but it cannot carry the whole story. If the real issue is income volatility, a monthly budget that assumes smooth income may keep failing even if the person is careful. If the real issue is medical debt, childcare, transportation, or a necessary car repair, the useful rule may be diagnostic before it is corrective. That is why the floor matters. The floor is the money required for the household to function. Housing, utilities, basic food, transportation to keep income possible, insurance where needed, minimum obligations, medicine, childcare if it is part of the income structure. It is not a moral category. It is the load-bearing category. The latest BLS consumer expenditure release published in December 2025 using 2024 data reported average annual expenditures of $78,535 and average income before taxes of $104,207 for all consumer units in 2024. Housing was the only major component with a statistically significant increase. Housing rose 3.3%, owned dwellings 7.0%, and rented dwellings 5.4%. That is average data, not your household. But it supports a practical idea. The largest claims deserve attention before the smallest guilt. When people skip the floor, they often blame the visible purchase instead of the structural load. Coffee gets the courtroom. Housing gets treated like weather. A small treat gets moral drama. A due date collision gets ignored. A good rule changes the diagnosis. If the floor leaves enough room, but the month still feels chaotic, the problem may be routing, timing, friction, or defaults. If the floor leaves almost no room, the problem may be income, housing, debt structure, public benefits, negotiation, refinancing options, roommate decisions, job constraints, family obligations, or other hard realities that no tidy rule should trivialize. That is not me giving individualized advice. It is a trust boundary. Rules are tools. They are not moral verdicts. The brightest thing a money rule can do is remove fake blame. It can show you whether the next best move is better design or a bigger life change. Both are different from sitting there, wondering why you are not more motivated. So what does this look like on a real payday? Not as a perfect app, not as a color-coded life makeover. As a short sequence, first, the deposit arrives and does not get interpreted as freedom yet. That is hard because the full number creates a little emotional lift. You want to believe the whole thing is available. The rule says, wait. Before the number becomes a feeling, attach the claims. Second, the next 7 to 14 days get mapped. Why that window? Because many money mistakes are not monthly in the way spreadsheets are monthly. They are weekly, rent week, grocery weekend, gas before work, the card payment before the next paycheck, the birthday dinner 3 days before the utility bill. A short visible window is often more useful than a beautiful 30-day fantasy. Third, recurring charges reapply for the job. Not every day. That would be exhausting. But on a set review day, the question is simple. Did this charge buy attention, time, health, relationships, or leverage recently? If yes, it can stay. If no, it goes to later. Later is an underrated word. Later tells your brain you are not losing the option forever. You are just refusing to prepay for a future mood. Fourth, the household gets one guilt-free, flexible number. This matters. If the system only says no, people stop using it. The flexible number is not an accident. It is the part of the paycheck that can be spent without a private trial, because the claims have already been respected. Rules become more humane than motivation right here. Motivation often produces a swing. Strict, then tired, then guilty, then loose, then strict again. A permission rule says the money inside this boundary is allowed. Spend it on convenience, friends, coffee, takeout, hobbies, small joy, whatever actually serves the week. The point is that it was chosen, not smuggled. Fifth, the restart is written before the failure. If the week breaks, the system should not ask for an apology. It should ask for the next small action. Check the claims. Pause one optional thing. Move one due date if possible. Reset the grocery fallback. Review the recurring list. Rebuild the next 7 days. The sequence is almost embarrassingly plain. Deposited. Window. Recurring review. Flexible permission. Restart. A plane is good. The more dramatic a money system feels, the less likely it is to survive a boring, stressful Tuesday. Every money rule should pass a human test. Does this still work when I am tired? Does this still work when income arrives late? Does this still work when a bill surprises me? Does this still work when I am annoyed and want a little control over my day? Does this still work after I fail once? If a rule only works when you are rested, optimistic, and uninterrupted, it is not a rule yet. It is a mood board. Some personal finance advice loses people here. It is built for the cleanest version of the viewer. The version who wakes up early, cooks every meal, reads every statement, negotiates every bill, cancels every unused app, never makes an emotional purchase, and always remembers the future. That person is not fake, exactly. That person visits sometimes. But your money system has to serve the version who is late, hungry, dealing with family, working a double shift, carrying stress, or just bored enough to buy something pointless. A rule that survives that version is worth more than a beautiful plan that needs perfect conditions. The scarcity research also needs nuance. A 2021 review of scarcity theory described the theory as coherent and original, but found mixed evidence for broad claims that poverty impairs cognitive capacity and cognitive control. That matters because the wrong takeaway becomes insulting fast. The better framing is not pressure makes people stupid. The better framing is pressure changes attention. It narrows the weak. It makes immediate claims louder. It forces trade-offs. It makes small mistakes more expensive. And when the margin is thin, a decision that looks irrational from the outside may be a person trying to get through the next few hours. Good rules should feel like support, not surveillance. A friction rule should protect you from the app you regret, not shame you for every pleasure. A routing rule should reveal claims, not turn the household into a punishment spreadsheet. A permission rule should defend chosen joy, not pretend joy is irresponsible. A restart rule should make the next step smaller, not make failure feel like evidence against your character. The human test is simple. If the rule makes you feel like you need a new personality, redesign the rule. If it makes the next ordinary week easier to navigate, keep it. The contrarian claim here is not that motivation is useless. Motivation is a spark. Sometimes you need it. Sometimes it gets you to open the account, pull the statement, cancel the thing, make the call, start the conversation, write the rule. But sparks are not infrastructure. A household cannot run on sparks. It needs routes. It needs defaults. It needs friction in the right places. It needs permission for spending that actually makes life better. It needs a restart that does not require shame as fuel. That is why the best money rule is not the one that sounds impressive. It is the one that removes a repeated decision from the worst possible moment. If payday keeps turning into confusion, build a routing rule. If shopping speed keeps turning into regret, build a friction rule. If guilt keeps attacking spending you actually value, build a permission rule. If one bad week keeps turning into a lost month, build a restart rule. And if the rule shows the math still does not work, believe the math. Do not turn a structural problem into a self-improvement project just because the internet prefers a cleaner story. The promise was never that rules make every month easy. They do not. The promise is smaller and more useful. A good rule can make the next normal month less noisy, less reconstructing your life from 6 transactions, less wondering whether the balance is real, less renegotiating the same subscription, the same takeout habit, the same bill collision, the same post-mistake shame, more money with names on it, more choices made while calm, more room for the parts of life that actually deserve spending. A money rule works when it turns one stressful question into a boring answer. And boring, in the right place, is not the opposite of freedom. It is how freedom gets protected from Tuesday.